Welcome to another edition of Bussines7, the program where we dissect topical issues of the day. And of course, right now, there is only one word on the lips of Namibians, and that is COVID-19. We will be talking to Rowland Brown, renowned economist, director of Cirrus Capital, and also with the Economic Association of Namibia about the extent of the current situation in Namibia and what can be done to mitigate its impact. We're also taking a look at the impact of the virus on informal businesses like taxi drivers and vendors, in this case kapana sellers, and we're going to bring you video on that. We also have Memory Mbai in the studio. She's a tax expert from PwC in Namibia, also looking at the COVID virus and what businesses can do to mitigate this. Stay tuned. COVID-19, the one thing Namibians are talking about non-stop. To put things in perspective, we have Rowland Brown. He's the director of Cirrus Capital and also part of the Economic Association of Namibia. Rowland, welcome and thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.
Put this in context for us.
Yeah, so we released a report yesterday, basically looking beyond the immediate health kind of side of this shock that we see in the economy at the moment, or in the country at the moment. And the reason for this is that I think much attention is going to how we slow the spread of this and ensure that it doesn't become a major problem from a health perspective. And this is what much of the rest of the world is doing, and it seems that the countries that have been very proactive in doing this have handled the health side of this much better than others. But the big problem that we see at the moment is that the countries that have taken these pretty extreme measures like lockdowns have also introduced stimulus packages in order to try and ensure that the economic implications of those lockdowns are not too severe. Now in Namibia, we are moving towards the lockdown situation very quickly, but we haven't seen any of the economic stimulus. And the problem with this is that the economic fallout from this is going to be devastating. The reason that we say that is, and much of the pushback that we get against this position seems to be based in a complete misunderstanding of the position that we're taking, which is that many of the wealthy people in the country, many of the tertiary sector employees in the country can go and work from home. Many of the businesses that are focused in that sort of space can operate without their people being at the office. Not all of them. Tourism is a good example of one that cannot, but many of these industries can. However, your primary and your secondary industries are going to be devastated by this. The likes of the construction industry, if the employees in the construction industry cannot be at work, it's very difficult to see how the construction companies will be paid and how they'll be able to pay salaries. The same in many of the parts of the agricultural sector, the mining sector, the manufacturing sector, the wholesale and retail trade space, and similar. And the impact of this can basically end up being that many of the employed people in the country lose their jobs as a result of the health measures that are quite rightly being taken. But without that support from government and from that huge fiscal and monetary stimulus, we now sit in a situation where the second round effects from trying to protect on the health side can be just as bad as the health effects.
Rowland, yes, as you've said, we've seen massive stimulus packages coming internationally. What is Namibia's position? Are we in the space where we can help?
Yeah, so what we've seen in Namibia so far is that the then governor, the now Minister of Finance, announced these major interest rate cuts on Friday last week, so 100 basis points. As discussed in your paper, I think that puts just under $1 billion back into the pockets of households, $1 billion and businesses. $1 billion is about 0.5% of GDP. if you look at what's being done elsewhere in the world, countries like the US, the UK, Spain, many other parts of the world, the stimulus packages that you're talking about to deal with the effects of these lockdowns are 10+% of GDP. It looks like the US is going to announce a 10% fiscal stimulus, so $2 trillion additional spending by government, by the American government, and also an additional 4 trillion of spending by the central bank. And so that's 30% of US GDP that's being injected to try to deal with this. And even then, the expectation is that US GDP growth is going to drop by about 50%, or the US GDP is going to drop by about 50% in the next quarter, and unemployment is going to go from 4% to 30%.
Staggering numbers.
Yeah, it's absolutely crippling numbers. And the problem with this is that if you consider the follow-on from that, it's that now you have huge numbers of unemployed people, tax for government starts to disappear, government spending more money but has less revenue. You start to see production falling, you start to see exports falling, you start to see consumption falling, and you can get yourself into an extended economic black hole. That stimulus is it's something that much of the world is doing and much of the world needs to do, and we're not really seeing it here yet. The impression that we get is that the gravity of the situation and the urgency of the situation is not well understood. With the lockdown coming now in the next day or so, it seems as if many companies are going to start to retrench quite aggressively now already. The reason for this is that we basically have 7 active cases that we know of at the moment. Say we're out by a factor of 10, say we're out by a factor of 100. Say there's 700 cases, which there aren't, but let's assume it. If we close down the country every time there's 700 cases, with our population, we'll have a number of shutdowns through the year. And the implication of that is that productive activity in the country is going to fall off a cliff. Because of this, many companies are basically being proactive and saying, we cannot withstand that type of shock over the next year. And if there's no fiscal support, if there's not material monetary support, our business will not be standing 6 months from now, much less 18 months from now. And as a result of that, businesses are looking at how do we, sustain some employment rather than go under. Now, our argument around this has been completely misconstrued as, we are just sort of being heartless capitalists. That's not the case at all. Basically, the situation is that we have to take the health measures that we're taking. My personal view is that we're probably acting a bit early, and we're acting way too slowly when it comes to way too slowly and much too small when it comes to the fiscal and monetary response. Our monetary hands are tied to some extent by the currency peg, but at the same time, from a fiscal side, we're not reacting nearly fast enough. But of course, we've had a lot of changing of seats of late and a new finance minister and so on. So it will take a little bit of time, but we need to react big and we need to react quickly to ensure that we don't have a major crisis here. Now, the health things we have to do, but we cannot do them in isolation without trying to ensure that we don't have some of the fallout. The other thing that I think one needs to bear in mind is that there's this view that we have no money, and that's the reason that we're not taking dramatic steps. It's not the case. We have got emergency funds, and those emergency funds have been, in many instances, ring-fenced for specific purposes. But those specific purposes are potential emergencies in the future. So you don't sit with a child in hospital and say, oh no, we can't spend our emergency funds because there might be an emergency in the future. When the emergency is on your doorstep, you have to use those funds. So we have got quite substantial funds available that we can inject into certain things. We have to accept something else, which the world is accepting now, which is that the normal fiscal rules are off the table. We are not in a situation where you target 3 or 4% deficits. We will be forced into a situation where we have a 5 to 10% deficit, and we need to ensure that while we're borrowing aggressively, our GDP doesn't drop off a cliff, because we're going to have a situation where a debt to GDP ratio, being a ratio of one versus the other, where debt is increasing and GDP is falling, and we need to protect that GDP as well. Now, the employment side of our economy, so household consumption is about 70% of our GDP. So if we do not protect households through this, we are going to have a situation where we find ourselves in a debt trap. So we need to act, we need to be very proactive, and we need to act swiftly on this. We've made a number of proposals with regards to where funds can be sourced from, and we are very cognizant of the fact that this will end at some point, and we don't want to be in another crisis of our own making in terms of how we've handled this. So our proposals are primarily looking at ways that government can fund this off balance sheet. There is some using up of some of the emergency reserves. There's some bridge financing. There's some support from the central bank, so a very targeted quantitative easing from the Namibian side from our central bank, which is doable despite, I think, views to the contrary. And then also looking at how the commercial banks can be utilized to assist in basically bridging cash flow challenges. And I think a lot of our proposals lean on the central banks to actually administer some of these things, because they are used to dealing with large numbers of people, large numbers of applications and so on. And I think that they are far better positioned than any other entities to actually administer some of these proposals that we put in place. I think the final kind of critical thing to mention here is that many people, I think, are looking at what we're saying in the quantum of our proposals and why we're making these proposals and thinking that it's a bit over the top. It isn't. And by the time people realize that the magnitude of the situation, it's going to be too late if we don't act quickly. So we have to act very quickly if we want to ensure that we don't have a much, much bigger economic shock than we need to have.
Coming back to your proposals, just elaborating a little bit on them, you have some very interesting proposals when it comes to job losses and cash support, and of course the civil service.
Yeah. So the first, the primary basis on which our proposals are based is on protecting household incomes and ensuring that we don't have major layoffs. Now, the reason that household incomes are under threat is because companies are going to go under. And if companies go under, obviously they close their doors and they send people home. So we need to make sure that there's a degree of flexibility in employment for companies, so that firstly, people don't just lose their jobs. And secondly, as we start to recover, salaries and wages and so on increase quickly again. So that's the primary basis on which our proposals are based. Then in terms of that, we believe that there needs to be some flexibility with regards to wage payments over the next few months. If people are sitting at home and not producing, and that's putting businesses under pressure, rather than the business go bankrupt and close its doors, firing or reducing 100% of its employment, we say rather try and find ways that you can keep everyone employed and adjust incomes lower during a period when people are not being productive. This is very, very tough on the people that we're talking about, though. Because obviously they have expenses as well. And so we focused on how can we ensure that those expenses are carefully managed and reduced to the greatest degree possible. So there we have a proposal with regards to reducing rent or mortgage payments during periods where people's incomes are negatively affected. And we have details on how that can be funded. This is not a pie in the sky idea. This is a practical idea that can be implemented, and we explain how it can be implemented. The reason for this is that the provision of a rental house, the provision of a mortgage is not free, so we need to find a way to ensure that the cost of providing that is not borne by an individual that can't afford to bear it, because then you're just causing more problems than you solve. So we have practical proposals there, as well as that we have practical proposals with regards to how utility payments can be basically put on ice. If you use water, you do still pay for it, but you have an extended period of time in which to do it. And then at the same time, you can't be charged interest on it. So we have on your non-payments. So we have measures that can ensure that the City of Windhoek and other utility providers can continue to provide those services without experiencing cash flow pressures that they can't handle, because obviously City of Windhoek has costs as well. So if it's not receiving any income, but it still has to pay its costs, their problems. So we've come up with practical solutions to that as well. We've looked at a number of tax proposals, particularly aimed at lower income people, so higher income people, those people working in the tertiary sector giving me a hard time on Twitter, who are not going to be affected by this too much. They don't get the benefits of this, but lower income people get tax breaks. At the same time, we have a specific proposal with regards to informal sector. So this includes the likes of domestic workers, but also people like taxi drivers and other informal sector employees. Then we believe that there's not much that one can do that doesn't include a direct transfer from government. So we propose a direct transfer to registered informal sector employees effectively, and that also has the benefit of ensuring that people become registered. So whether you're registered now or not doesn't matter, but you have an incentive to go and register as an informal sector employee with the Social Security Commission, and then direct transfers from the state will be required. That's the most expensive of all of our proposals, is to provide some support to informal sector people temporarily while this goes on. And then yes, we've looked at all of these things. We've looked at how they can be funded. We've looked at manners in which that funding can not put undue pressure on the already strained government finances. So government finances are strained going into this, but I mean, obviously SACU payments, the taxes on trade, will be under huge pressure. Mining profits will be under pressure. Personal income tax is going to come off a cliff. Company tax is going to disappear this year, or largely disappear this year. And so government finances are under major pressure, and we just have to accept the fact that this is not going to be a normal fiscal year. We need to get through it as best we can. We need to ensure that we don't have growth falling off a cliff, and that we're well positioned for a recovery after this virus has passed. And obviously this is all due to the fact that we need to take these severe precautions when it comes to people's health.
Well, it's a relief to see that there are some measures that can be taken to assure that Namibia survives this the best it can, especially in light of very, very little information coming from government in terms of how we're going to handle this fiscally. Rowland, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
A lot of businesses, especially in the informal sector, like taxi drivers and vendors, are already feeling the coronavirus impact on their pockets. Joining us in the studio is Philippus Usiku. Philippus is a new member of the Bussines7 and economics team at Namibia Media Holdings. Philippus, you went this morning to places like the single quarters, the kapana markets, to go and speak to people about how badly this impact is. Shortly summarize for us the sentiment there.
It is really a sad reality, and it is something that we really don't have much control over. But I foresee our Namibian economy being really hit hard, considering that we're already in a recession, and the economy will really be hit hard because a lot of economic activities won't be taking place or continuing as they used to. And really, I do foresee productivity going down, and with low-skilled workers and semi-skilled workers they are really going to see the going tough because they are unable to work from home. And really, I do appreciate the former governor of Namibia's decision to reduce the repo rate, which will also see the prime rate reducing for consumers. And really, for now, it is really just important that we stick to the basic, as we're told, wash our hands, avoid crowded areas, and give time for all relevant stakeholders to do the necessary planning and to see how we can curb or tackle this pandemic.
Absolutely. Coming back to the taxi drivers and the vendors, today on page 3 in Bussines7, you can of course find that in Republikein, Algemene Zeitung, and the Namibian Sun. We specifically looked at taxi drivers and vendors, spoke to them, and the fall in income, even before the lockdown that we're moving into now, is already absolutely significant and truly scary. Philippus, you made a couple of videos while you were in the single quarters and the kapana markets. We're going to take a look at that now. The videos are in Oshivambu. We're coming back after we've looked at them, and Philippus will quickly summarize for us, for those of us who do not understand Oshivambu.
Ai kombigane yonkiti nguno shaike wa moni wangu no onkiti nguno go ya mochirongo muno ai o business ave tupaifita vende e customer bishongora chinene itatumono e customer shasha no yatira okuyamanu kuno nkiti au ondipagi maro twetapongera unduruko ndiri uogoki twaturango mahemere go mea no sewa tupe customer divure nga vikareke onkiti uriko kureka di infecting yakwa twaninga ne kutia e customer ina venda dirimumwe alviranda da ngudumana chinene twedipango mito kutia na vende by one taranda ta ikokure ankotea na tango taranda ina vikarike daramba sana customer irimano na tango irimano ngudumana chinene na tango jono acheta onfi achi afte nga an kombigane yani ronga yetu otyarombwera ngane baharo ngone customer kutia na kare na uyogoki ya era nawa iyo pare kikutu na ikare oga akara ikosho na kenyara ne customer javia ne pita frangono atuvirombwere ngane kutia magina tameko kuria na inga tehemere ndiriri mianga shimurire tenderi turame ariyo mea notewa tikosho ne kenyara after shama no kugia na tango tikosho tunaponga news play nembu hawiturwa kenyaranga oku tiwaeke ngane shama na upoka effecting onkisi tukareke nga kachona ko ngashinga murete nje ndiringa na ndikosha daera na ondazari ma era nawa ando pare kimanje na mara ne chiri ne customer dani ngeshona shasho dhati ando chiri to nyatu ningine e customer shavia no kuranda ina vikara za buduma na chineni shao customer haya na iye ngamba iwan aitetero zarata yao ai omwa ya randurako na tango training aitetero zarata yao ai ya ndirete kutia Shaturo gitini mambiono achikenda nao nonkifita utandere nudiuka marangashi mo market amuno anwa eche ouvako kutia onkifingono ondipagi mara paifa eche weringarera ironge kidarera erinawa agwatere customer na nimambia rombero atuiro ngitangane ko kutikene e customer dani ga questiona man ya business apaifa ya lusingalere customer katuna kutiongi ndinga mara itfine achike ige chiri na komesha shatu konjisa unkisa tugutivirike ko kure nata ya ngai kyanje mbindi nangeno okukumagiza ngeno oshiwana odishishikucha obisinsa hetu embisinsa letu ozawa pevi ne customer o tazende talishongora kakele kwa shono andi popilike ngala mwenyo zetweni nduvite kucho coronavirus anyino hetu kumashirishinlen leka kale kwa shono twapumbo kuikerera coronavirus na ndongano akuti wana tukuse uhera e customer zetu diko shekenyara itashikwasacha katunu inima yo kuikava coronavirus hetu kwa ita ohino kala hetu kwa ashike otuno kukaleka pongala mwenyo hetu paife ondalo kuindira nandoko okepangero kucha otuno kuningangi ni semba yo matara kesha gumwe ngutea okukike musemo matara otuno kukala twakwatwa ko coronavirus ngashingino tategera erike ya mukolo tayuzi nandoko mbero wa etulombwele kucha matara tagapata ili tagapata ngengi tagapata otuli mudhi gunene shashi ngenge kuno ngala mwenyo no bisinsa kaipa otuno kuningangi na holiki gashingino tuli mengungo jano yenji kesha gumwe vista keshe siku ya kalunga atutalelwa poke vista otuli mudhi gashike watala kucha sana mimbi yakatucho yenji shamato kwata ko coronavirus onena nyira atukihadha palala me streeta no ipangelo katuna ya wana otapumbwa lela tukale tuli safe lela tuli nando momagumbo twikalekelo pamwena kapena nguta tahipongundu hantu more than 50 ngashi muno amukala ya muna hantu ya dhangika more than 300 tuli muudhigu twapumbwa ikelele kwatho kutya natuningwe ngini ngenga kutiwa omatala itagapata tandicipopile shaashi ngekuno onkalamwenyo kapena ombisinsi paife ngino natukwathele ike tupewe yamukulo kutya matala nagapate ilu itagapata malo matala nagapate shaashi otwala tukalekepo eenkalamwenyo dhetu Namibia otuli mwachona shamike twakwatwa ko coronavirus tamuthigala omuntu
nduti toshiwana kutya tulimo nayi pedina lonkisiwe ya moshilongo shetu okutya andinzile nepangelo letu likale ngo talituwambidhidha ku hatudulu okutya oshinima shimwe shotete she atusitalakele motaxi omu kasitoma kapena shaalunona vosikolo vamafuto paife atuyindile ne mu epangelo litale kutya otaliningipo ngeipi opo po tukala tuhupu nawa kapena sha iikulya kapena shali iimaliwa kapena sha atuyindile ne oshinima shimwe mukale ngo tantale oshiwana ashishe shaashi otanga anu bamwe bafila no mumbo konjala esito tadzipate shane esito tadzapate dikulya nena tukanga peni kulya ilo pamwe opena ngo oweimwe taidulu kuningwa pano opo tutudule kuhupa no shima sho shilingawo atukandabala ne tu batele oshiwana she tukale ngo ne tulina nelandulafano she natuludeninga komalandulafano malondafano apumbiwa natukalinga nya tudenye tatulombule niko shiwana pamwe nando mopate otanga kalango muna eboloko tanga muna shike natudafanya komalandafano malo tunanwengo nawa shili natukale na shiwana onkiso tawendele runene ndapandulu nene oshima shilinga ontusolinga. Yes.
Like you've said, indeed, Philippus, the sad reality of an economy that's only beginning to feel the impact of COVID. What I found particularly interesting is at the Tapana Vendors, how empty it was. Plenty of tables at the back, no customers. The two ladies at the kapana stalls, what did they say?
They are really just concerned about how they are going to make a living, considering that people will no longer be mobile as they used to be, and they really need to, and obviously they need to earn an income to support their families. But right now they are really just taking the necessary precautions, making sure that when customers are coming, they are washing their hands, and also ensuring that they don't assist too many customers at once to avoid them coming too close to each other. But they do understand with the measures put in place by the government, because they do understand that their lives are more important than their business. In fact, one of them said, without life, there is no business. And the taxi driver really is just saying the taxi business is only his sole source of income. And with the whole lockdown of schools and people not going to work, where is he going to get an income from? And he's really just urging the government, maybe they can meet them halfway, because they feel like they are incurring the whole cost of this lockdown.
That's very interesting that he would say that. We had an interview with Rowland Brown, and one of the proposals released by the Economic Association of Namibia yesterday, in fact, was that government tap into the emergency funds, etc., to its disposal, because they are there, and for instance, supplement affected workers with a cash grant every month, just to help with the impact on the consumer. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
At any time and in any economy, tax is a current topic, even more so now in the time of COVID. With us in the studio is Memory Mbai. She's a senior manager at PwC Namibia. Hi, Memory, and welcome to the studio.
Hi, and thank you very much for having me.
Memory auditors, you work with the businesses all the time, so you must have quite a good idea of how they feel. Prior to COVID, what was the sentiment in Namibia's business?
I think very much from a tax perspective, we assess the status of the economy based on how big of a demand there is for our services. And we have seen a bit of a slowdown when it comes to buying of opinions, and that is an indication that things have been tough, even prior to COVID.
Now, of course, we are in COVID, and though everybody's trying to be or remain rational and calm, of course, there are underlying fears. What would you advise businesses to do at the moment?
I think this is the time where, first of all, especially with the lockdowns, we need to capitalize on our investment in technology, because we would be seeing a move towards having, online meetings and people working from home. So that investment is now, it's time to assess whether it's really paying off. Then secondly, it's to assess the dependency on global trade. You would have noted that with the lockdown of the borders, it is more likely that the supply chain may be impacted. And in that regard, it obviously ultimately impacts the consumers and the availability of goods in the economy.
Yes, that's a very huge topic at the moment.
Correct.
Even though consumers have been absolutely assured that there will not be a shortage of essential goods and services. Of course, there is uncertainty, and we have seen, to an extent, panic buying picking up as from yesterday already. And Namibia will have to look at more methods to diversify the economy, to become more industry geared, because that would certainly have mitigated the situation that we are in now, being so dependent. I mean, we are a net importer, especially from South Africa.
Indeed, and I think it's very important that you mention consumers. It's important for us as consumers to bear in mind that we ultimately influence the price that we pay. Because with the lockdown of the borders, and I understand that there would be a few borders open between Namibia and South Africa, but we need to keep in mind that South Africa also has to import whatever is lacking within their economy to supply our demands. And that being said, is panic buying is ultimately not the right way to go, if I can put it that way, because it creates shortages. Shortages lead to businesses having to meet this demand, and then that ultimately also impacts where they source their products from. So it's very important that we keep in mind that panic buying is not ideal for the economy.
Yes, it's very much an economics 101 principle.
Exactly.
Higher demand,
exactly,
fuels price increases, etc. So the consumer has a big responsibility too.
Exactly.
Not just to themselves in relation to prices, but I think it's also, especially in this time, a case of consider the next consumer. Everybody wants a little bit of the cake right now.
Yes, and I think the important thing to bear in mind is also the VAT considerations.
Yes.
Because businesses have to pay import VAT on all the goods that they import. So having to source alternate suppliers means that their duties, their fees, the cost of actually getting the goods into Namibia may increase. And then 15% import VAT is charged on that already increased price, if we can call it that. This price ultimately needs to be passed down to the consumer. And then already we are seeing strains within the economy. Because if we look at the proposed 21 days lockdown that Namibia is going into, already I foresee that we may have, I don't want to call it a shortage per se, but the VAT revenue will be impacted because people won't be roaming around freely and buying goods. And VAT is one source of revenue for the government. In addition, with the travel ban, we are seeing that the tourism industry is being impacted. The livelihood of people. And then also SACU is very important to consider. Yes, yeah.
One of the main streams of our economy as far as it comes with revenue is concerned.
Correct.
So this whole COVID thing has got many, many tentacles, and really the management of the impact lies in everybody's hands.
Definitely, yes. And I think the important message is that we mustn't panic. We definitely have to try to stay calm, bearing in mind the consequences, such as, you know, the increased prices, the VAT on the increased prices. And it's just important for us to remain calm, if I can reiterate that.
Yes.
Yeah.
If we could all make T-shirts right now, it would be something like, stay calm and buy responsibly.
Exactly, yes.
Memory, thank you very much for joining us. It has been a very interesting topic,
yes.
And we'll stay in touch with you.
Thank you very much for having me, and pleasant day, everyone.
That was Memory Mbai, the Senior Manager at PwC Namibia. That's our program for this week. Thank you for tuning in. We're going to play out with a video. I spoke on Friday to then still the governor of the Bank of Namibia, Ipumbu. Of course, he has been appointed as Namibia's new Minister of Finance. And on Friday, as governor, I asked him for his message to Namibians. Governor Shimi, very difficult times. What is your message to Namibians?
My message to the Namibian people is that we must remain calm. We must continue to practice good hygiene as we are advised by our authority. We must not lose hope. We shall survive this. We just need to work together and remain united.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.